The book of Philippians is a heartfelt letter from the Apostle Paul to his friends in the church at Philippi. It was written around AD 61, during a tough time for Paul. He was under house arrest in Rome, waiting for a trial that could cost him his life. Even though he was stuck in chains, Paul wasn't bitter or hopeless. Instead, he was full of joy, gratitude, and encouragement for the Philippians, who had supported him from the very beginning of his work in their city. Philippi was an important Roman colony in Macedonia, full of proud Roman citizens. It was a lively city because of its location on a major trade route, the Via Egnatia. Being a Roman colony came with benefits, like self-governance and certain freedoms, but it also brought challenges for Christians. At that time, saying Jesus is Lord wasn't just a statement of faith, it was seen as an act of defiance against the Roman emperor, who was considered the ultimate authority. So the Philippian Christians faced criticism and persecution for their beliefs, but they stayed strong in their faith. Paul had a special connection with this church. Philippi was the first place he preached the gospel in Europe. It all started during one of Paul's missionary trips, when he had a vision of a man from Macedonia asking for help. Paul followed that vision to Philippi, where he met a group of women praying by the river. One of them, Lydia, a successful businesswoman, became the first Christian convert in Europe, and her home became the meeting place for the new church. But Paul's time in Philippi wasn't easy. He and his companion Silas were once thrown into prison for casting a spirit out of a slave girl, which upset her owners. Even in jail, Paul and Silas prayed and sang hymns, and their faith led to an incredible miracle, a sudden earthquake that broke open the prison doors. This event led to the jailer and his entire family becoming believers in Jesus. Stories like these created a deep bond between Paul and the Philippians. Over the years, the Philippians proved to be a faithful and generous church. They supported Paul not just with their prayers, but also financially, even when they themselves were struggling. When Paul was imprisoned in Rome, they sent one of their members, Epaphroditus, with a gift to help him. Epaphroditus nearly died during the trip, but he recovered and returned with Paul's letter, a message filled with love, encouragement, and a reminder of the joy that comes from following Jesus, no matter what challenges you face. Join us as we explore the story of Philippians, a journey through Paul's words of encouragement, his call to humility, and his invitation to rejoice in Christ, no matter the circumstances. It's a timeless message of hope and perseverance, reminding us to press on toward the ultimate goal, knowing Jesus and living in the power of his love. Paul began his letter by expressing how thankful he was for the Philippians. "Every time I think of you," he wrote, "I thank God and pray with joy because of how you've partnered with me in spreading the good news of Jesus." He reminded them that God, who had started his work in their lives, would keep working in them until the day Jesus returned. Philippians 1:6. Even though Paul was in chains, he didn't see his imprisonment as a setback. Instead, he saw it as an opportunity. The Roman guards who were with him day and night were hearing about Jesus, and other believers were gaining courage to share the gospel boldly. Some preached with good motives, while others preached to make Paul's situation worse. But Paul didn't care about their motives. He was just happy that Jesus was being proclaimed. Paul reflected on his life and his purpose. "For me, living means serving Christ, and dying would be even better because I'd be with him," he explained, Philippians 1:21. But he decided it was better for him to remain alive so he could continue helping the Philippians grow in their faith. He urged them to live in a way that honored the gospel, to stand firm in unity, and not to be afraid of those who oppose them. Next, Paul turned to the topic of unity. He urged the Philippians to be humble, to think of others as more important than themselves, and to put the needs of others above their own. To illustrate this, he pointed to Jesus as the ultimate example of humility. Paul wrote about how Jesus, though he was God, didn't cling to his divine privileges. Instead, he made himself nothing, becoming a servant and humbling himself even to the point of dying on a cross. Because of this, God exalted him to the highest place, giving him a name above every name. One day, Paul said, "Every knee would bow and every tongue confess that Jesus is Lord." Philippians 2, 5-11. Paul encouraged the Philippians to live out their salvation with awe and reverence, knowing that God was working in them. He told them to do everything without complaining or arguing so they could shine like stars in a dark and broken world. Philippians 2, 14-15. Paul also mentioned two individuals who embodied humility and service. Timothy, a young man deeply committed to Christ, genuinely cared for the Philippians. Epaphroditus, who had delivered their gift, had nearly died from illness during his journey, but God had healed him. Paul was sending Epaphroditus back to Philippi with this letter, urging the church to honor him for his sacrifice. Chapter 3. Pressing on toward the goal. In chapter 3, Paul warned the Philippians about false teachers who claimed that following Jewish laws, like circumcision, was necessary for salvation. Paul explained that no one could earn righteousness through rituals or achievements. He shared his own story to make the point. He had once been a proud Pharisee, strictly following the Jewish law, but now he considered all of that worthless compared to the joy of knowing Christ. "I want to know Christ," Paul wrote, "to experience the power of his resurrection and to share in his sufferings." Philippians 3:10. For Paul, everything in life boiled down to this: striving to become more like Christ and reaching the eternal goal God had set for him. He compared the Christian life to a race, urging the Philippians to forget what was behind and focus on what was ahead. "I press on toward the goal to win the prize for which God has called me heavenward in Christ Jesus," he wrote. Philippians 3:14. He reminded them that their true citizenship was not on earth but in heaven, where they were waiting for Jesus to return and transform everything. In his final chapter, Paul offered practical advice for living a joyful and peaceful life. First, he urged the Philippians to resolve conflicts and work together. He mentioned two women, Euodia and Syntyche, who needed to reconcile, and he asked the church to help them. Then Paul gave them one of the most powerful instructions in the letter: rejoice in the Lord always. I'll say it again, rejoice. He told them not to be anxious about anything, but to pray about everything. Present your requests to God with thanksgiving, he said, and the peace of God, which goes beyond understanding, will guard your hearts and minds in Christ Jesus. Philippians 4:6-7. Paul also taught them to focus their thoughts on what is true, noble, right, pure, lovely, and praiseworthy. By doing this, they could live with peace and joy, no matter what was happening around them. Finally, Paul thanked them for their generosity. Their gifts had helped him greatly, but he reminded them that his contentment didn't depend on his circumstances. "I've learned the secret of being content," he wrote. "I can do all things through Christ who gives me strength." Philippians 4:13. Paul ended his letter with warm greetings and a reminder that even members of Caesar's household had become believers, showing how the gospel was spreading even in the heart of the Roman Empire. The story of Philippians is one of hope, humility, and joy in the face of trials. Paul shows us how to find joy not in our circumstances, but in our relationship with Christ. He encourages us to live with humility and unity, to keep pressing forward in faith, and to trust God with our worries. The Philippians' generosity and faithfulness inspire us to live generously and support one another as we follow Christ. Ultimately, Philippians reminds us that our true citizenship is in heaven and our joy is in knowing Jesus.